Thank you for having us. The title of the 5th Istanbul Design Biennial is Empathy Revisited, Designs for More Than One. It will take place from the 15th of October onwards, and it has begun in a sense today here at MAAT as well. So it's a biennial that is extended in time. We want to explore how design plays a role in setting up relations and emotional connections between ourselves and our environment. You can expect to see 3 main lines of program. One is a digital program. It's a critical cooking show, and what we saw here today at MAAT is the beginning of one of them. And this is a program that explores food in an expanded sense as a form of design, not only of the food itself on the plate, but also the design of landscapes and territories. The second, let's say, line of program is a library of land and sea that will be present in Istanbul, and that will host a number of research projects about the Mediterranean as a region. And so those projects explore the geopolitical dimensions of what we could say the foodscapes, right? Where our food comes from and what it impacts. And then finally, there's a series of new civic rituals, and these are interventions in the city. So things like new gardens, new forms of gardens, or playgrounds, and new kinds of architecture that produce encounters between humans, of course, but also with birds and stars and cats and many other elements, microbes that live in the city.
And what is this cooking sessions project, and how came this invitation to Bureau to participate, and of course why Lisbon and why MAAT?
Mm-hmm. So the cooking show is a series of episodes that will be broadcast every week, and these episodes explore food in its widest sense. I'm very interested in food today because food is perhaps the most direct way for us to tackle the climate crisis in which we're living. And that is because we know that we must do a radical change to our diets, but also food has this incredible capacity to generate discourse, because everyone has an opinion about food. Everyone knows what they like and not, and so it's a really interesting way to begin a civic debate about where the things that we eat, how they change us, but also how they change the environment in which we live. And so the cooking show is an opportunity, it's a program that will host some of the most intelligent, exciting designers that are expanding our understanding of food and the impacts of food today in the world. So the invitation to Bureau came after we did an open call. So for this edition of the Biennial, we wanted to open up the conversation and to receive contributions from different designers and studios. And so Bureau originally approached us through the open call, and then we began a dialogue, and it's developed into what it is today. And we're so happy, I'm so happy that we began that conversation, and that we can celebrate today this beginning here at MAAT as well.
So, hi, Daniel.
Hi.
Could you explain in what consists this Mush Room project, and why did you invite this specific chef, Walter Enmagar and Philippe Flizard?
Yes. So it's been a kind of like a very quick series of events and a very quick and intense journey. Because yes, we did start with another project which would have been very interesting, and maybe we'll make someday, about another political moment in the history of design, which was the kitchen debate, which was a discussion between Nixon and Khrushchev, and that's where the discussion started. Then, of course, there was the COVID situation, and the whole format changed or evolved in the Istanbul Biennale. And I was a bit late on the book reading, but I was reading at that time this book from Anat Singh, which is called mushrooms or the end of the world. At the end of the world. So it's a very poetic criticism of capitalism, but a very positive criticism in the sense that she develops a series of stories about the food itself, the mushrooms, specific mushrooms. This is a long story, it's going to take a bit of time. Specific mushrooms that are the matsusake, which are originally from Japan, but they have the capacity to grow on humanly destroyed environments. So these are the mushrooms that grow after Hiroshima, these are the mushrooms that grow after Chernobyl, and they have this collaborative attitude with the roots of the trees, of pine trees mainly, that once the soil and the land is very poor, they help the roots to nourish themselves, and vice versa, and the roots of the trees help the mushroom to exist. This in the book is accompanied by another story, which is extremely interesting and poetic as well, and tough at times. It's about this community of people that live in the forest of Oregon, because the whole story happens in the forest of Oregon, a forest that has been abandoned somehow because the production was not efficient enough to provide enough wood, let's say burning wood for the American economy. And it was kind of like abandoned in the 60s, and this new population took over the forest. And it's mainly a population like it happens in some of the U.S. marginal spaces, like the desert or this forest, for instance. So you find all this very great variety of marginal populations, and in this case, there are a lot of Asians that are actually kind of living here because they realized that they could hunt or cultivate the matsusake, which they recognize as a very precious mushrooms. So there's a whole economy there, a parallel economy that goes actually back to Japan. So they gather all these mushrooms and then actually they send them back to Japan, where it's actually sold at very high prices. So that's the set. But I've been very influenced by many things lately. But there's a whole series of readings as well, which are all kind of parallel. Anna Tsing being a colleague of Donna Haraway, who's also a very influential person, and Bruno Latour, of course. And I would, even if it's not exactly the same line of thinking, Bert Sloterdijk. So there was a whole series of connectivities that I am very interested in. And in this design, we wanted to reflect on that, since kind of like there was this political feeling of the whole Istanbul Biennial. I mean, not only a feeling, but it was quite explicitly said in the brief. But I wanted to tackle it with a poetic kind of like entry. So in this case, then the collaboration with Walter Alnagar and Philippe was very natural, in the sense that I don't know who said it the other day, but I think it was Walter, that we are all sort of like parasites. We work in a parasital way towards our disciplines or our fields. Philippe doesn't call himself a musician; he calls himself an artist, using music as one of his activity. Walter has a very critical point of view towards cooking and the cooking world, and of course he's a chef, and he has this exigency and the demanding of a pro, but at the same time with a very critical point of view, and he has a subtitle a little bit like yours for the Biennale, who's like cooking for everyone. So he wants to do like the best cooking, but for everyone. So right now he's mounting a social project for to feed actually the people who cannot even afford to eat, not to say good food, but just normal food in Geneva. And I have also from very long time a kind of like a critical peripheral access towards architecture, which is I'm trained as an architect. So all these things together made a nice conversation, let's say. So actually, once we started working together, things kind of like popped up. So just to give very simple examples, we started. I wrote a small text first of all, just to think about the subject. Passed it on to Walter, and Walter said, "Okay, we have to work on fermentation and we have to work on molds." And we had this idea, and then fermentation needs enclosed space, so we thought about the tent. like a very simple tent that it's there now, but that also works as a screen somehow, as a format of a screen, because the finality is to make a movie, a small movie. Well, 30 minutes is not so small, but a short movie. But anyway, so there was all these things together. And then actually when I first contacted Philippe, we started to talk. I listened to his music. Actually, he has a whole series of pieces that are called, I don't want to say the name wrong, but it's a conference for stone. So basically the setup was kind of like done with all this, crossing and all this line crossing. If I take once again Donna Haraway's string line theory, is that you kind of like go with the flow. You look at how things happen, and the stories connect, and that's how the project evolved in the form that you have seen today. There's also, maybe just to come back to one of the things you said previously, Mariana, is I really believe that as an architect, as a designer, we don't only work for people, but we work for, it might sound very pretentious, but it's actually the opposite. We work for the world. So there's no difference between birds and worms and people. So, it's, I think we have to be much more multi-specific. And one of the first intuitive moments that I had in my life is I'm a big fan of cinema, and one of my best favorite cinema directors is David Cronenberg, and I always like his take on parasiting and actually at one point, if you have seen the movie, one of his movies that is called Existence, have you seen it? Yeah. Okay. So there is this moment where the gamer has to plug himself in with this very umbilical or mother-like cordon, and the guy is panicking, and he says, how are you going to inject me this exterior world into my body, and the other, which is the game master, whose name is Allegra Geller, she looks at him and she opens her mouth, just goes like. So basically saying, we are connected. Whatever is here is actually entering my body all the time. And I love this idea. And I think that what we did today is a little bit part of that. It's how, things evolve from music, architecture, design, food, and they get into our body. Maybe they come out, whatever. There's all these connections that I really enjoy. And one thing that I want to say as well, because it was a very beautiful reaction from Philippe, is that when I started, he had not read the book of Anna Tsing, and when I contacted him, I told him, what I would love to do is like we can kind of like echo the whole idea of smell, because in the book of Anna Tsing, there's, the smell comes over and over because these mushrooms are really smelly, and I told him I would love that, in the film we cannot smell, but sound can be there, so maybe you can turn yourself into a smell. So he kind of like loved this idea and tried to work on it. I don't know if it's very clear, but there's many things, but anyway.
And how was to create this performance in a space that is already so intervened by this museum was installation by Sólido?
Yeah, of course, it's difficult and complex to intervene in a setup that has been specifically built for the space, and it has a lot of presence, even geometrical presence, I would say, and aesthetical presence. And but I think it's okay. It's also a context. So this is maybe from my architect's point of view. You always have context, so you have to work with them. So you don't have to try to pretend that they're not there. So it was just another. That's why also our design was extremely simple. I mean, one of the things that I really loved, and the people of my office, they can tell you, I love the tube. I love the pink tube, and it was like my favorite design piece of the whole thing. So we spend a lot of time. I mean, because anyway, I won't get into details because it will be very long. But anyway, the whole idea was to be extremely simple, and then, of course, to close this very basic tent. That for us, it was also an echoing of the forest people, and kind of like this DIY culture, a mix of DIY with very precise stuff. But also, it was a response to the mesh that it's everywhere. So of course we didn't want to compete with that, and we were looking I guess, effects that were not so far from so ill, because there was all this idea of transparency and translucency and disappearance as well. So using this very, very cheap construction plastic, it was also an idea to say, okay, let's do something else that it's less proper, less nice, but that kind of like a dialogue in another way, and you can really see that it's from another temporality, let's say. The soil is a little bit, it's still temporary and it's still ephemeral, but it corresponds to another kind of temporary construction.
Now we think about empathy as a capacity to perceive other people's expressions and feelings, but historically it has another meaning that is very relevant to bring back to discussion. Thinking about feelings, affections, and relations, this performance could be exactly that, an approach to an old meaning of empathy and a reflection of the true substance of our body and how the connections that we create can take us to a different level of existence.
Beautiful.
What can we say?
So I think it's good to discuss about this how we can connect and to rethink about empathy in this kind of level of feelings or affections, and how we can relate this theme, the main theme of the Biennale, which is empathy, with the forms that connects stones, birds.
Yeah. I thought it was really interesting to hear you speak, Daniel, both about how you offer the poetic response to what you saw as a kind of political statement, let's say, but then also how these string connections that are affective connections, because the fact that we had such a short time also production-wise made it so that we had to resort to our our friends, which is quite interesting. And I thought that when I first decided to start working around this in this direction of empathy, I think what I was interested in was that the report about soil by the IPCC had just had come out last year, and what it showed for me, what was most impactful, was that it showed that the places that were governed by either indigenous communities or very small local populations had safeguarded biodiversity to a much greater extent, much more diversity of species, of course, much more care and preservation of habitats. And I thought it was interesting because in those small contexts often the relationship with nature is an effective one, to do with religion sometimes, but also to do with its cultural practices, and that strikes me as maybe our biggest problem. This cultural problem that we have is that we've somehow detached ourselves from nature, and by creating statistics and numbers don't work with us anymore. We've become numb, and so perhaps the development of a more effective relation through practice, I think, is an interesting way to go about it. So it was great to hear how you talked about the process of making the work.
Yeah, I do believe that there's been, and for me this kind of like this past years have been sort of like a revelation in that sense, that once again I come from the architectural background, which is a very deterministic somehow practice and culture, historically, and especially after modernism, let's say after the 30s or so, architecture has been like such a highway, with not a lot of subtleties in many ways. I'm exaggerating and generalizing a little bit, but when you talk about women, when you talk about multi-specificity, when you talk, then architecture kind of like melts down, because there are many things that have not been considered, by far not considered for a long time, and in that sense, I was, and if I'm talking about revelation, it comes a little bit from reading. I must say that's maybe my way of working as well, and all those authors that I spoke previously, Bruno Latour and Donna Haraway and Sloterdijk and all these great thinkers, and it was a revelation in the sense that you kind of like start looking around yourself with other eyes and with other perspectives, and that's, I guess that's how my practice also radically changed in 2012, and I started being interested in whatever design can be, and I don't mind using the word design for my practice, which in some countries from the Anglo-Saxon world it's very natural. From the French world it's not very natural. Design, if you say that you're an architect and a designer, architects look at you like saying ooh many times. But I discovered David Holgrim from the Sébastien Marot's exhibition, which is the father of permaculture. And he puts it this way, saying that permaculture is a practice of design, and he comes from a design school, and this is acknowledging that at this stage of the development of humanity, let's say, everything is about design. You can, of course, agriculture is about design, permaculture is about design, so you cannot avoid not taking care of things in whichever way, and taking care of things is a matter also of anticipating them, which does not mean acting upon them in an aggressive way as an architect or traditional architect would do, but it's just dialoguing with a wider audience
But inevitably you're always implicating all of those other agents. Voluntarily or not. From the extraction of materials, I mean, we know that architecture is one of the most
polluting activities.
Activities, but and of course every design has an impact that goes way beyond its immediate building, but I think what's new is just this recognition that is true, and that now there's a desire to work with it in a more conscious way. And I think that in the last there have been in the last, I don't want to say a number, years, 10, I don't know, there has been, I think, a real interest in the practice of architecture and design in terms of mapping out these kinds of things, right? Sort of almost, we could say, like a forensic type.
Totally.
Forensic architecture as well, but beyond that, like a practice of mapping out and investigating what this impact is. And I think now we're at the stage where there is a series of practices like yours who are then now taking that understanding into the making of projects, and that's really exciting. And even the authors you were mentioning this year, I was external at a couple of universities. It was so interesting to see that this is what the new generation is reading. And if you think about when we went to college, we were reading very different things.
Of course.
Berlin this will produce as well. I think it's an interesting moment because of that.
Yeah, but I think that the good thing about these new practices, I'm not so new because I'm getting old, but anyway.
No, but new way of practicing, of course. Like, this is really not.
It's not an age thing.
Even in the biennial, we're not. It's not a new generation type of biennial. I think we're quite happy that we're.
But what is interesting, I find in those types of practices, I hope like mine, is that you have to reconsider the way you work completely. Also in the economical way you work, because of course. The architectural practice is one who makes benefits by nature. It's you have to create an office. I mean, we all know how the evolution of an architectural office goes. You win a competition at one point, and then you have a bit of money. Then you engage a couple of guys, usually your friends or interns, and then you grow. Base case scenario, you grow a little bit, and then there you find yourself building buildings. These other practices, like mine, we have to find other ways of earning our lives, because money does not come from the things we love to do, like this one. So then you have to arrange yourself differently, and I think that this is also very positively. And then, of course, I learn a lot from my friends who are artists or people involved in theater, and who they have to find. And I mean, great artists, they have to find parallel economies. I mean, there are of course the artists who just sell and they kind of like are in the art market. But even then, the economical way, I mean, how they work economically is very different. And I think this is also a very, very important thing in architectural culture, to kind of like make the structures of making architecture evolve in a different way.
And that's the Matsutake again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is a parallel economy. You have to find other ways to do your researches, to do investigation. Of course, in many cases, has to do with universities and schools. But I think, there are many actually. Maybe not as many in Switzerland or in Portugal as we were discussing before. But I mean, I know a lot of them from Spain or England, of course, Germany. There are people everywhere who are practicing differently. And I think when people provoke me saying, that pieces like this are not architecture, it's like, why wouldn't be I mean, because I don't want to consider myself any other. I wouldn't call myself an artist, of course not, because I think we have different mindsets, different education, and for me, all this is also about building and detailing and construction, but just on another scale with another temporality. And it's also about telling stories, but that's another thing.
Yeah, and it's an encounter, right? I think what's really interesting here is that there's this encounter, of course, at the microscopic level that we were just hearing about, these molds, right, and the lactose
this is beautiful.
And the bacteria that have been working there for the last 2 days. Yeah. But then there's also the encounter between you and the team and that formed around the project. And today, and then also today with everyone, everyone tasting it. But I hesitate with these distinctions.
Yeah.
But in architecture, we're obsessed with these
distinctions.
Disciplinary cataloging, right? It's also like a really bad heritage, the 19th century baggage.
Of course. Yeah. And then I always refer to the. Because when I was teaching, not now in the Polytechnical School of Lausanne, but at the HED, which is an art and design school in Geneva, I introduced very strongly the idea of decorative. I saying, decorative is good. It's a discipline. On the contrary, it's a discipline that has not been investigated for a long time because it's, our profession is very machist, of course, and decorative was assimilated to a feminine practice. So, of course, this is superficial, nothing important. And I always refer to the beginning, before modernism, when it was growing in the beginning of the 20th century, end of the 19th. Always love to cite, William Morris, that his main work was actually wallpaper, as a political act because he was a socialist believer, and I think, and this guy who was one of the main actors of draft and arts and crafts at that point, but that evolved into the Werkbund, everything, and the first Bauhaus, and this guy was doing wallpaper. He was doing little birds.
He was doing, yes, exactly. He was also making at his own scale.
There's
this wonderful house that he built.
The Red House.
The Red House. Which there you can really see that he was experimenting live with his own house. And I think that scale, the scale of it's not even the domestic, but it's the scale of your body, is the scale at which perhaps you can best innovate. I'm not sure. But I think this has something to do with the kinds of practices we're talking about, right? Which is this there's a certain control of the size of the experiment.
And connection.
Morris, I mean, that's incredible. And also practices that today, like Assemble, who have been deeply influenced by Morris, of course, and all that context, are also interestingly, even though they have been around and very successful for a number of years, they're not following that pattern of growth and also not building massively big things. So
No, definitely, But the interesting thing about Assemble, and it's something that is happening a little bit in some parts of the world as well, is that the architects, some of them are becoming builders as well, which is also very interesting. Like them, they have a full workshop and everything, and this is something that is happening also a little bit. The people also that come from the culture of Patrick Bouchin as well in France, that are being involved themselves into building and trying to dialogue very much more closely. So this is also a scale thing. If you're building yourself, there's so much you can do.
And the working with your own materials as well, right?
Exactly.
Creating your own materials, all of a sudden is in some cases like the only option you have to liberate from the industrial processes of architecture.
Yeah.
If you make
Yeah.
your own.
Yeah.
And if you make your own, then
Tiles.
tiles, bricks, don't know, waxes, all kinds of materials, and I think that's emerging as well. And I think it's a sense. I think it has to do with the cutting ties with this pre-formatted model of industrialization.
We've been doing something in the Polytechnical School in Lausanne that we called houses with the first year students, because I co-direct the laboratory that takes care of the first year program. And we started doing something that we consider kind of political, because we have 250 students every year coming in. And like 5 years ago, we did small construction with some of them, and then usually in summer we retreat ourselves, so we go somewhere and we reflect on the next year's program. And I don't know, somebody from the team said, why don't we build a house? And then we said, okay, let's do it. And we actually started this program that it was called Houses. Now it's becoming Gardens, actually. It's in a good echo.
Nice.
we just changed it. But we've been doing this program where we actually build kind of like very big structures that are called houses, that we build with the students. And we built it in the Lausanne campus, and then one in Zurich, one in the new museum in Brussels, and last year it was in Evian in France. This year, of course, we didn't build anything. But the interesting thing is that you create a dynamic with these first year students, and so basically the last month of a little bit more than last month, the studios transform themselves into a huge workshop where we prefab everything, and then we take it to one site and we do all the logistics, and everything is built by the students with very little tooling. So sometimes it's actually hand saws and stuff like that. But the political act is that actually they get so much into it with our accompaniment that, you know, all of a sudden, you know, in their free moments they build themselves a chair, or you know, at one point they had to build the drawing boards, and they, you know, 5 or 6. So once you get into the rhythm, you have the material, you have the tools, you have the dynamic, and then you cut it and you do a drawing board. So, you know, I mean, the implication of you can imagine, and sometimes I tell me, can you believe that you're actually destroying IKEA by doing this? You know, you're just opposing that attitude towards your attitude, you know, and if you continue that further, it can become very dangerous. Of course, this is hypothetical, as is within a very institutionalized context, but nevertheless, I think the attitude is very interesting, you know, that by creating a community of people that connect with things and with context, then things can happen in a very ambitious way. Also, you can build these small utopias that become a real thing. Yeah,
definitely. And then architects can also decide what, or think about what is needed, right?
Yeah.
And define. I think that's the very political act of saying I'm building a chair because I need one.
Yeah.
Is just a recognition that the chair is needed in the first place.
Probably
a chair is never needed, really, but I think that's really empowering as a critical tool.